Synergy is one of the most vital components of any deck. Take the infamous VV Cauldron deck that terrorized Standard for almost 5 months. Every piece of this deck had some sort of interaction with almost every other card, and when they combined, they created a disgustingly powerful aggro deck that consistently placed in multiple top 8 slots every tournament. Synergy is just as important in Commander, if not more so. Sure, there are one-off devastating bombs that hurl you ahead of your opponents, but in an eternal 99 card singleton format, it's basically mandatory to assemble some combination of cards to lead you to that sweet victory. The more synergy between these, the more cohesive and smooth your deck will execute its game plan. That's why EDHREC has a little synergy percentage by every card you see. This number tells you how much a card is played in a particular deck compared to other decks of the same identity. For example, Viridian Revel is played in 87% of Kibo decks, while it only sees play in 5% of all Gruul decks combined. This gives Viridian Revel an 82% synergy score. This isn't a perfect formula for measuring synergy necessarily, but for the purposes of recommending a good monkey commander card, which is exactly what EDHREC is for, this does a great job. These two cards represent two important pieces of a value engine. Kibo gives bananas to your opponents to eat, and when they do, you draw cards. The only problem is, what if they refuse to? That's where the third and final piece comes in, the next highest synergy score for Kibo. Gorilla Shaman lets you pay X, X, and 1 to destroy target non-creature artifact with mana value X. With Gorilla Shaman, you can pay 0 for both X's to destroy a token artifact with no mana value, such as bananas. This means you can essentially just pay 1 mana to draw a card off of Viridian Revel. Of course, your opponent is just going to sack the banana in response and gain some life, but the outcome is still the same. You draw a card for 1 mana as long as your opponents have bananas. Hey, that rhymed. Value engines come in many different forms, and today I want to talk about how to incorporate them in your decks and how I went about building a commander specifically focusing on value engines. First, what is an engine? A value engine is a combination of cards that can be reused endlessly to provide some kind of benefit to you. Technically, many cards are considered one-card engines, but that's not really what I'm here to talk about. Whether it be card draw, removal, ramp, or board presence, the possibilities are pretty much endless. Notably, a value engine is different than an infinite combo, though infinites can sometimes use engines as a payoff. Let's take Angelic Renewal and Sun Titan for example. These two create a neat little interaction. If Sun Titan dies, it will trigger the renewal and you can sacrifice it to return the Sun Titan to the battlefield. Then, when Sun Titan enters, it returns the renewal from the graveyard to the battlefield and voila! Your board is back to the way it was. With these two in play, you have free range to swing Sun Titan and trigger his ability every turn without the fear of taking an unfavorable trade. This rewards you with a pretty useful, albeit niche, engine, allowing you to consistently reuse small permanents that sacrifice themselves, like fetchlands, baubles, martyrs, or any other weird combo you stumble upon. However, all it takes is one Blood Artist and a Sack Ellet to turn this neat engine into an infinite win con, and at that point you've turned your engine into an infinite combo. In general, if you're trying to make an engine for Bracket 2, I'd stray away from throwing in these pieces that trivialize the reward that the engine offers. Personally, at least, I feel like it's a lot less telegraphed, which is what Bracket 2 is meant to be catered to. Not that infinites are bad, I run multiple infinite wins in a couple decks, but if you're looking to spice up your commander deck with interesting engines, infinites just offer a different play pattern that doesn't really mesh well with the kind of grindy playstyle offered by a lower power engine. But enough of that. Let's talk about how to build engines for your decks and reap the sweet benefit of continuous value. There's something about the previous example you may have noticed. Both of these cards, on their own, completely independent of the engine, are desirable in a white reanimator deck. This is pretty much a prerequisite that could be easily brushed off if you get too carried away in a deck building rabbit hole. The engine pieces have to be cards that fit well with the rest of your deck. You may look at Font of Mythos and Smothering Tithe and go, ooh, now that's a sweet engine. And sure, while this would net you 9 treasures and 2 extra cards every rotation, you're setting yourself up for future games where you never draw the Tithe and you have this dead group hug card just staring back at you. Or maybe someone blows it up and suddenly you're back to parity. You get the point. This engine would fit well in something like Bumbleflower, that's filled with payoffs for making your opponents draw cards, but at that point, Bumbleflower could most likely just take the place of the font. This is why I'd say the best first place to look is your commander. This is really obvious advice, so I won't sit here and go on and on like, you should put cards in your commander deck that work good with your commander. but more so suggests that you should use those foundations as a springboard to find deeper synergies you couldn't have seen in the beginning. Real quick, if you like the video and you want to support the channel, consider leaving a like and maybe even subscribing. If you become a member, you also gain access to some of our old stuff like gameplays and vlogs, but I'll be honest, it's not that much content. It's really just a nice way to support the channel and keep the content dream alive. If you want to pick up one of our playmats too, you can go to inkmats.com and use code CBJ at checkout to get 15% off. Thanks y'all, back to the video. For explaining how an engine is built, I'll have some help from our friend Really Bad at Magic the Gathering. In an engine, there are a few components. You usually have some kind of value generator, sometimes even with just a one-off effect. Then you have a set of pieces that looks to amplify that value beyond its original limits and milk it over several turns. Take Overlord of the Hauntwoods and Springheart Nantuko. Overlord of the Hauntwoods is a large body that makes a land token each time it enters or attacks, a perfectly reasonable effect on a 5-mana body. But with Springheart, you flip that value upside down. Now you essentially have as many rampant growths as you want to pay mana for, but not only that, you also have that many 6/5s that make you lands when they attack. Hauntwoods is the value, Nantuko is the amplifier. This engine is so efficient it honestly becomes a win con, which is the golden scenario every engine hopes to reach.
But why don't we push it even further? Take a commander like Yarok the Desecrated, the poster child for turning good enter the battlefields into absurd ones. With both Springheart, Overlord, and Yarok on the battlefield, every creature that enters isn't just doubled, it's amplified. More tokens, more triggers, more mana, more everything. And you can push this even further by focusing on simple, repeatable enter the battlefield effects and letting Yarok act as a built-in amplifier from the command zone. And once you layer in landfall as your profit engine, things get crazy fast. For example, a creature like Tatyova Benthic Druid normally draws you 1 card per land, but with Yarok out, that instantly becomes 2 cards per land drop. Add Springheart and Overlord, generating even more lands drop per turn? Forget about it. More ETBs means more landfall, which means more cards, which is twice the lands and twice the draws. And if raw card draw isn't good enough for you, consider payoffs that scale explosively with extra land enter the battlefields. One of my favorites is Mossborn Hydra. Normally, this big beastie just doubles every time you play a land, but why not double it again with Yarok on the battlefield? But even if you don't have your payoffs yet, Yarok still carries you. Cards like Hoarding Broodlord or Runescarred Demon may be pricey on the CMC scale, but Yarok turns their enter the battlefield tutors into doubling the value, letting you assemble whatever engine pieces you're missing, ramp, landfall, or finishers. In the end, the formula is simple. Identify what powers your engine, that being lands and enter the battlefield effects. Identify what enables it, that being Yarok and other ETB doublers like Starfield Vocalist or something like Atraxa in a different color. Multiple land drops per turn and a high quantity of ETB creatures. And then figure out what profits from it. Things like Springheart Nantuko, Overlord of the Hauntwood, Mossborn Hydra, or Tatyova. Once all 3 align, Yarok doesn't just double your value, but he defines it. And a huge thank you to Zenny and the rest of the Cardboard Junkies for letting me hop on their channel. They're all great. If you thought I was a little bit great, or really bad, feel free to check out all of my socials. There's a link tree or whatever the free version of a link tree is in the bio, and I also have a really bad YouTube channel. It's kind of my brand. Whee! Thanks, y'all.
There are a lot of creatures with great ETBs, and finding a way to reuse those is sure to give you a lead. Every color has some way to flicker creatures. White and blue are the most straightforward, black has reanimation and cheat death effects, red can make temporary clones, and green has self-bounce. If you don't use these, you always have colorless options as well. Blade of Cells, Conjurer's Closet, and even Mimic Vat or Dino DNA if you have an excess of mana. Besides Flicker though, you can pretty much turn anything that has a triggered ability into an engine. For the sake of demonstration, I randomly generated one on Scryfall and got Arcbound Lancer. With Modular 4, when this creature dies, you give its counters to another artifact creature. Combine this with Goblin Welder and Untapper and Bottle Golems to swing 7 trample and gain 7 life every turn. These are all cards that could see themselves in a Modular Matters artifact deck, but probably at the cost of overall deck cohesion. It brings up another factor that's important to consider. How much value are you generating given the amount of setup you put in, and is this value serving an important role in your deck's strategy? This is an engine, but it's probably popping off around maybe turn 4 or 5 if you have the right star, and how much do you value what essentially amounts to a 7/7 lifelink trample on turns 5, 6, 7, and 8? If you're playing a grindy control strategy or bracket 2, maybe this is a nice tempo lead for you, but if you're trying to keep up with faster decks or combos, maybe this isn't great. For engines, just like every card in your deck, you should make sure to evaluate what purpose that engine serves and whether it fits with the playstyle you're trying to create. Just because you can make an engine out of almost anything doesn't mean you should. Sometimes the first combo you think up isn't the greatest either. After a little digging, I found Smile at Death. Now this is a much faster and more valuable engine. With one sack outlet like KCI, not only are you generating 4 mana and several counters on board, but the Smile at Death directly synergizes with Modular since it gives both of the creatures extra counters. This lets you cut out filler cards that you might have justified because they synergize with your engines, instead making room for cards that synergize more with the cards in your 99. When I first thought of making this video, I knew I wanted to build deck lists to showcase engines and show how they can outgrind your opponents. So I was looking for a new commander and I was thinking about maybe building Tokasia. Being able to tap your creatures outside of combat makes for a lot of interesting engine options, and throwing stuff into your grave is amazing fuel for eventually reusing that stuff and bringing back some more valuable artifacts later down the line. But while I was deciding what to pick, Eve approached me.
Hey guys, it's Eve. So the other day I saw Zen looking through our legendary binder for a new commander to build, and I thought it would be fun if I picked a secret commander for him to build. So here we are. Recently I saw a short from Tabletop Jocks talking about Shattergang Brothers, and the art is what really caught my attention. So naturally, I did what everyone else does when they want to build something. I took a screenshot of it for it to die on my phone. So I thought this would be a great excuse to bring it to life. So let's go surprise Zen.
Shattergang is actually perfect for what I was looking for. He has a grindy and flexible ability that, if used effectively, actively curbs your opponent's momentum while still being open-ended for all sorts of shenanigans. While making this list, there were dozens of times I had the full 100 cards, then I thought, oh wait, what if I added this or that? And then I was suddenly up to 103 and had to make more cuts. The decklist will be in the description, but let me break down this absolute abomination of a 99. Instead of making an aristocrat-style sacrifice deck, I figured I'd rather get the most value out of sacrificing 1 or 2 permanents a turn. And what screams sacrificing one thing a turn more than Birthing Pod? Alright, yes, Birthing Pod is in the deck, but I promise it's a lot more than that. Just hear me out. Birthing Pod, Birthing Ritual, and Industrial Advancement all ask us to sacrifice a creature each turn to bring something new onto our board. With Hoarding Dragon, Demonic Tutor, Imperial Recruiter into Lagomos, and Sidisi, finding one of these is almost guaranteed each game. Not to mention 6, Ewit, Shigeki, Regrowth, and Balaged Recovery can all grab them from the grave if they get milled or tutored into grave. Once one of these are out, not gonna lie, the game plan is pretty chaotic. You do the best to generate as much value as possible, but almost any creature combination you find creates some kind of engine. Here are some of my favorites. I have the previously mentioned Springheart Nantuko and Overlord combo, but Springheart works amazingly with almost every other creature, giving us access to repeatable removal, ramp, card draw, reanimation, or win cons. Similarly, Kikijiki and Jaxus fill the same role for ETB creatures. With Birthing Pod specifically, 2-drops can be converted into multiple forms of card draw, tutors, reanimation, and sack outlets that have different impacts on the early versus late games. Same is true from 3 to 4, summing out card draw and tutors for more reanimation, removal, and engine amplifiers, and from there the chain continues up to 8 with less options progressively, but all worth the sacrifice. With a whopping 41 creatures, it's almost always the right decision to sacrifice any creature you can to Industrial Advancement. I've had multiple goldfishing tests where I sack a 2-drop to flip over a bomb like Atali or Kodama, and suddenly the game is kicked into overdrive. There are 22 creatures with power 2 or less, giving us an array of options to fetch with Imperial Recruiter, including almost any kind of permanent removal, grave hate, or if you're ready to set up a win, you can grab Kikijiki, Jaxus, or Springheart to keep tutoring, find Gary, and start cloning him for the dub. That leads to win cons. Besides Grey Merchant loops, you also have Atali loops, Phoenix Fleet Airship, and if you have Delirium, FOMO combos with Kiki-Jiki for multiple extra combats. It's important to note that this isn't infinite. Each time you make a FOMO, you have to discard a card and draw, so you only get as many attacks as you have cards in your library, and since it's only an attack with a 2/3, this is actually significant. If an opponent has an indestructible blocker or a big enough board, there's a pretty good chance you won't be able to take them out before you deck yourself. More likely, this combo helps you kill an opponent, fill your hand, fix your grave, and cast a massive living death. Finally, the deck also has Beifong's Bounty Hunters and Bloodcast, which create an infinite sack loop for mana, card draw, and from there just wins. This deck has so much built-in inevitability. The hardest part is just deciding which piece to use for your given situation. I'll leave a link to the deck list in the description below. Give it a few playtests and you'll see what I mean. Do you run any engines in your decks? What are some of your favorites? If you want to talk more about engines and maybe get some advice on your decks, feel free to join our Discord linked in the description. Don't forget to pick up a new high-quality playmat over at Ink Mats and use our code CBJ for a 15% discount. Thanks for liking, subscribing, and of course, watching the video. We'll see you next time.